The tumor is not an alien trying to kill you and consume you. The tumor really is sufficient amount of cells are metabolically deranged, and then they basically start sending distress signals. And if the rest of the body is in a metabolically suppressed state or suboptimal, eventually the distress signal can consume the entire body. So really, cancer should never be looked as a localized disease. It's a systemic disease, always a systemic disease. And if a cancer forms somewhere, that always means that the body as a whole did not have the sufficient resources to prevent the tumor from forming, which usually means lower systemic metabolic rate, which can happen, for a variety of reasons. Bad diet, chronic stress, toxins in the environment, ionizing radiation is a huge one.
Long time no talk. How are things going?
About the same. Just busy, taking care of 2 kids.
Because you spent the holidays overseas, right?
No, not the winter ones. I was traveling for business, and I usually go to Bulgaria in the summer.
Okay. So you're going to Bulgaria in a few months. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, end of July, basically between July and August, I'm usually there.
Awesome. It's been a long time. How is life in general? You're on the East Coast.
Yeah.
In the DC area.
Yeah, I live in DC proper. The company is based here, but like the warehouse and the place where we make the supplements, it's in I think Northern Virginia, a few miles from here.
Yeah, cool. So life in general, same old.
Nothing's really changed. I mean, actually, crime went down in DC, which is a great thing, and I think one of the reasons is that National Guard has been here since maybe September, I would say. And then between 2020 2023 it was terrible, actually, all the way through 2024. And then they caught the local police, and actually the police of several big cities, fudging the crime stats to show like a precipitous drop in crime, but it actually turned out that they're just reclassifying murder as assault. Assault is like a petty theft, or like simple assault. So basically the number of felonies went down statistically, but it was very dangerous. Up until September I was avoiding being outside after dark.
It's been some crazy times these past few years. Crazy times. Yes. Before we dive into cancer study updates, curious, like what's Georgie been eating lately? What's some of your favorite meals this winter?
I mean, during the day, I'm actually not very hungry, but in the morning, what I do is I shouldn't say the brand. There's a brand out there that makes organic milk, which is sweetened, and it's vanilla flavor. So I take that. Basically, they come in these little cartons that's about a cup each. So I put this in a glass, and then I add 2 scoops of gelatin. So basically about, I don't know, 40 grams, 42 grams is what, each scoop is 21 grams apparently. And then this dissolves very well, right? And then I add 3 grams of calcium carbonate. And because of the gelatin, which is something, it has the properties of known as a hydrotrope. So in other words, it improves the water solubility of anything else you put in a watery solution with it. So the calcium carbonate actually normally doesn't dissolve in water very well, but when you put the gelatin, it makes it, it dissolves very well, and it makes a perfect, morning shake. And then I, usually eat maybe oysters or shrimp for lunch, and then at night it's usually some kind of a soup with seafood, preferably, and then I add another scoop of gelatin.
What about the carbs?
Well, yeah, I mean, right there.
So carbs along the way.
Yeah. As as needed.
Yeah.
I mean, if I feel like my blood glucose is dropping, which when that happens, usually get like the chills and start shaking a little bit. That means stress hormones are rising.
Yeah.
I mean, I try not to get it to that point, but I'm saying I kind of time it basically. I drink maybe 4 of these a day.
Starting your day off with some calcium and gelatin maxing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and carbs. I mean, like the milk that I'm drinking is sweetened.
Yeah.
So I drink that, and then I usually follow it with a bottle of this. So the ratio is maybe 3-to-1 carbs to protein, I would say.
I'm not gonna lie, Georgie, that day of eating sounds very interesting to me. But I think that like what what it shows is there's many different ways to do this, right? There's many different ways to live a healthy lifestyle and meet your micronutrient and macronutrient needs. Like, I don't have kids yet, and so I don't have the schedule that you have. I prefer having 3 meals per day. That just like works well for me. I don't like to have a lot of liquids for my meals, whereas that's what works for your schedule. That's what you enjoy. That's what fits in. And I think that people really stress out about being like perfect about everything, when in
Right.
reality, it's what works for your life right now. What tastes good? What do you enjoy? What can you hit your micronutrients, your collagen, your calcium requirements with? And I wish I
I
had
would,
better access to seafood. I just really don't have good seafood around here. But
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that the seafood here is great, but it's, Whole Foods, Trader Joe's,
yeah,
they have decent selection. I would quote Ray, who said that whatever you do in diet or supplement wise, when you stop worrying about it, you're probably on the right track. Like
I love
basically,
that so much. When you stop stressing about being
yeah.
perfect and you kind of just like eat for what feels right.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think what he
Yeah.
meant is that basically once you this kind of goes into the background and you're not worried so much about it, means you feel good about you're in a good health. So you don't you know chase every number that you think you should be chasing. And I think he said that's a sign that you're on the right track. Your health is in good shape.
I love that. That's great. That's a good reminder for everyone where it's kind of like a good indicator of where you're at along your journey. If you're still stressing out about being perfect, something's doesn't feel right, you need to take a step back and be like, are you making your life harder by trying to be absolutely perfect when in reality there's many different ways to do it? And
Yep. Yep.
yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean, I
I'm
think as far as long as you avoid PUFA, right? I
yeah.
mean, and you don't even have to look at the amount of PUFA per meal. If most of the meals are you making yourself, or you eating things like seafood, or if you're buying cooked food, as long as you remember animal fat usually good, right?
Yeah.
Except for the chicken fat and the duck fat. So ruminant fat is great, butter is great. As long as the meal is being cooked with that, you don't have to necessarily worry about like exactly how many, I don't know, grams of PUFA you're consuming with each meal.
Yeah.
Now, if you're eating olive oil, because it's about 10 to 12% PUFA, you probably don't want to do more than, like, I don't know, a tablespoon per meal if you're eating salad with every meal.
Yeah.
But then again, I wouldn't necessarily eat salad with every meal, because when you eat raw vegetables, we're not really meant to eat them. I mean, they should be cooked before eating, because the over the parts that are above ground, they have these digestion inhibiting enzymes. So only the herbivores are really designed and evolved to eat them raw. We're not. But if you enjoy a salad, like Ray said, somebody asked him, like, well, I'm going to a banquet, and then basically it's going to be the only food there is going to be baked salmon. What do I do? And Ray said, I might as well enjoy it. I mean, if it's like a one-off thing, it's better to feel good about yourself, and if you like salmon, and enjoy this meal every once in a while, then worry about the high amount of omega-3, which is another type of fufu in the salmon.
Keep your PUFA intake low, enjoy your food,
Mhm.
find a way that's sustainable for your lifestyle and make it work. I've been really into like steamed food recently, like
Yep.
using a steamer because it's a glass steamer box and it's so easy. You just like put all the food in there, can go do other things while your meal cooks. You don't have to worry about it burning or anything. And it's so easily digestible because the steaming like really breaks down the fibers. And so I really like veggies. So I include veggies in most meals. And so it pre-breaks it down. Um, I I like salads too, though, like as a little side dish, but I think that that's where mainstream America has kind of lost touch.
Yeah.
Salads were like a pre-digestive bitter thing
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
where
Yep.
it
Yep.
can be a great side dish to a meal, but when we start treating a salad as a meal instead of a side piece, there's no energy, there's no carbohydrates in there. So then you're just
Exactly.
filling your body with fiber and there's no energy carbohydrates to help break that down. I think that that's where we get lost. So I don't want people to like fear salads, but also respect them for what they are, which is a side piece and
Exactly.
not
It
it's
should be a
not your
side dish.
main
It
dish.
should not be a main dish. So another problem with it being a main dish is that because most people want a protein, right? Unless you're a complete vegan, a lot of people will order a salad. It'll be like a steak salad or chicken
Yeah.
Caesar salad or a Cobb salad. Well, now you've combined a lot of protein, which is traditionally harder to digest than the other two micronutrients, and then you're eating with something that's a digestive inhibitor.
Yeah.
So it's if it's a large enough meal, it can really create a problem. So like you said, I think the goal of the salad is basically not stimulate digestion, but like stimulate peristalsis because of the fiber in it.
Yeah.
And that's the main idea. I mean, you're not really absorbing many of the nutrients inside because they can only be absorbed after the vegetable. I mean, the salad is cooked. Like I said, only the herbivores are really good at extracting those. So it's really mostly for the fiber. So if you're eating as a fiber, just like Ray said, a carrot, a grated carrot, or shredded carrot, one carrot is enough, right?
Yeah.
So the salad, the same thing. It should be the size. I mean, if you look at the fiber content, it will probably come down to, if you want to eat the same amount of fiber, insoluble fiber that is in a single carrot, you're probably talking about a cup, like a salad cup, like not the main dish,
Yeah.
and then load up on all the protein and the fatty cuts on top of it.
Yeah,
Really,
like
it's not
have
a
your
mistake.
salad, have your steak, but add some carbohydrates to the meal to help provide the actual energy that your digestive tract needs to move that down, or else the lettuce may just sit there.
And also, when you're eating protein, the amino acids are great. One of the most powerful stimulators. Actually, much more powerful than sucrose.
Yeah.
So when you eat protein, the powerful stimulators of insulin. So when insulin rises, your blood glucose is going to drop. So if you're eating a salad with protein alone, it will trigger a stress reaction because there's no carbs there. But when you have the carbs with the protein, basically you'll prevent the stress reaction from the rising insulin.
If you take a step back and reflect, how many people in America today have a salad? So, like, let's say just lettuce, tomato, cucumber with like steak or chicken, and then PUFA soybean ranch
Oh yeah,
dressing. It's like the worst combination. And it's
yeah.
not because salad is bad, it's just because you're giving yourself no carbohydrates, you're dropping your blood sugar with your protein, and then you're overloading on PUFAs. It's like, what's a better recipe for disaster than the modern American salad?
Virtually everybody that I know that eats the salad as the main dish kind of thing. There's a startup here which is now going national. It started in DC, by the way, by a couple of graduates from Georgetown, which I attended as well. It was called Sweet Green, and basically like that's all they sell. I mean, now they're branching to other things because they realize the business model is kind of failing. People after the fad wore out, people realized that it's not really like a very healthy way to eat on a daily basis. So everybody that I know that was a massive Sweet Green fan and was eating salads for like 2 or 3 meals a day, their common complaint was that after they eat, they'll feel sluggish. And usually the sluggishness comes from basically your metabolic rate declining, endotoxin rising, right? Also insulin rising.
Yeah.
That also makes you sluggish or at least sleepy.
Yeah.
And they're saying, "Wow, this is a healthy meal. Why, I feel like taking a nap right now. Like, why is that? Not even taking a nap. It's basically like, wow, I'm drained. It's like I just went to the gym and had a workout."
It doesn't
So
even taste
little by
good.
little, they switch their diets basically. Now they still eat salads, but maybe they cut it down to like one a day, and they
Yeah.
don't even do it as the main dish. They actually eat it as a side dish, and you can see that reflected in the Sweet Green quarterly reports. Basically, people don't really eat it's Sweet Green as a main meal. They just go there for like I don't know, like a snack or something in the afternoon.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, Georgie. I I am curious, and I know a lot of other people are curious. What is an update on the cancer studies? There was such promising results last time we talked when you
Mhm.
were, introducing B vitamins into these mice models for, fighting off cancer. And then you started doing a little bit more aspirin and then that other compound. What was the name of that other compound?
It's a metabolite of aspirin. It's known as a 2,6-dihydroxybenzoic acid. So it's basically salicylic acid, which is the main metabolite of aspirin, with an extra hydroxyl group. So salicylic acid the name is 2-hydroxybenzoic acid. So this is 2,6-dihydroxybenzoic acid. And it's basically much more acidic, much more lipophilic. And there was a study with it, I think it was done back in the 1950s with humans, and they were treating rheumatoid arthritis. So aspirin and salicylic acid they had been the mainstream treatment for rheumatoid arthritis for a very long time before the glucocorticoids became available. And people were taking 8 to 10 grams of aspirin a day in order to keep their RA symptoms in check. And then that study basically, administered 7.5 grams of aspirin daily to one group, and then 750 milligrams, which is 10 times lower dose, to another group. And they had the exact same relief of symptoms. So the study opined that, because of its increased acidity and increased lipophilicity, this compound is basically like, I don't call aspirin on steroids, but it should have the same anti-inflammatory effects as aspirin, but at a much lower dose. Ray kind of hinted to the increased lipophilicity of a compound is probably going to make it more potent. Somebody asked him about caffeine, which is a xanthine molecule, and then he gave an example of something called pentoxifylline, which is caffeine, but basically with a long aliphatic chain that makes it more lipophilic. And if you look at the studies, you will see that pentoxifylline is about 3 to 4 times more effective than caffeine at doing the same things. They're still the same core molecule, but it's the way it's absorbed and distributed to the body and how long it's retained. That whenever the lipophilicity is increased, these variables increase as well. So in other words, you can achieve the same with less, and the effects would last longer. So that's what the 2,6-dihydroxybenzoic acid did. And if you look at the dosages that were used, so basically I was using it at a dose of about 6 to 7 times lower. There was one group that was using 2,6-dihydroxybenzoic acid and B vitamins. No, actually, only the 2,6-dihydroxybenzoic acid. Then there was the other group with aspirin and the B vitamins, and the difference in terms of dosage between the aspirin and the 2,6-DHBA, which is the way I abbreviate it, was about 5 or 6 times. So in other words, much lower dosage. And then the model that we used was the mantle cell lymphoma. It's a really aggressive cancer. It's actually human cancer, but it's transplanted onto mice after they destroy the thymus gland. It's because otherwise the mouse would reject the human tumor, the immune system. So it has no known cure. Nothing has been shown so far in animal studies to be able to stop it, let alone cure it. So that first study, successful one that you saw, basically was with the aspirin and the B vitamins. And then I followed up with another one, which I provided some screenshots on Twitter as well, showing that the different groups. Then I did several groups, one with the B vitamins and aspirin, and one with only 2,6-DHBA, and the 2,6-DHBA group had the same disappearance rates, I think like 2/3, as the group with aspirin and B vitamins. So I thought that model is pretty much proven. So I went on and did a prostate cancer study. I don't know if we discussed it. So it kind of confirmed that that what being told by mainstream medicine about prostate cancer is I don't want to call it a lie because I'll probably get sued, but it's completely wrong. So as most people know, I mean, the ones who had prostate cancer or dealt with people that had it, the main theory is that androgens cause prostate cancer, specifically dihydrotestosterone, which is the most potent endogenous androgen that we have, that males, actually women have it as well, but males produce much more of it. So all of the treatments so far for prostate cancer are effectively either chemical or, back in the day, even surgical castration. They said if we remove the male gonads, basically you're not going to be producing many androgens, and the prostate cancer will disappear. And there, initially there is some reduction in the rate of tumor growth. It doesn't really shrink. But then after that, after 2 or 3 years, prostate cancer comes back in a much more aggressive manner, metastasizes basically, and it's usually lethal. And that's the type of tumor that recently, what's the name of Scott Adams passed away from. Basically, he had a metastatic prostate cancer, and for years he was on effectively a chemical castration drug, so his androgens were running to the ground. And then I saw that a couple of studies came circa 2016 or 2018 that show that if you take terminal prostate cancer patients and inject the testosterone directly into their prostate, and basically in all of the patients the tumor disappeared. So it was a shocking study.
And then the table over.
Exactly.
That is your theory is wrong.
Yeah, but partially. So mainstream medicine is cunning. Immediately came back, said, "Oh, testosterone is a precursor to estrogen. Maybe because it converts it to estrogen, and estrogen has been used to treat prostate cancer because it's another form of chemical castration for males and for females. By the way, if you take high enough estrogen, you will be infertile, and that was the basis of the birth control pill for a very long time. So, anyways, they injected testosterone. Tumor went away. By the way, these people had terminal prognosis. They had metastatic breast cancer. Nothing could be done for them. They were effectively in hospice care and taking opioids, which, by the way, speed up the tumor growth. Injected the prostate with testosterone. Tumor went away. Doctor said, we don't like this result. What can we do to compromise it? Oh, yes, testosterone is a precursor to estrogen, and of course, when we inject these people with testosterone, they convert a lot of it to estrogen. So the estrogen that's really it's really doing it's good. So they could keep, by using that rationale, they could keep prescribing men estrogen, synthetic estrogens. So I said, okay, let's actually really drive a stake into the heart of this whole crap. So let's take an androgen that cannot be converted to estrogen. And by the way, let's take the exact androgen that mainstream medicine says is the cause of prostate cancer, which is DHT, dihydrotestosterone. So I said, okay, let's drive another stake into into the heart of another crappy theory that estrogen is protective, right? So what do? I have one group that's taking DHT by itself, right? Then I have another group that is taking an aromatase inhibitor by itself. And then I have a third group that is taking a combination of dihydrotestosterone and an aromatase inhibitor. And then let's see what happens. So miraculously or not, you're probably expecting already what the results were. In the dihydrotestosterone only and the aromatase only groups, the tumor growth was completely stopped. It just flatlined and stayed like that until the end of the study. In the combination of the dihydrotestosterone and the aromatase inhibitor, we had 2 out of 3 cures. The tumor completely disappeared. So I think at that point, there's very little doubt that, and I know it's a small study, but the findings are so opposite of what we should have seen, right? We should have seen the group that with DHT, we should have seen growth rate spike. They should die very quickly. Same with the aromatase inhibitor. If you inhibit in the synthesis of estrogen, you should see again increased tumor growth because apparently supposedly the estrogen was suppressing the tumor growth. And then a combination should really have died the fastest, right? Yeah. We had an exponential growth. In reality, we had the exact opposite effect. So
okay, let's take a step back real quick for anyone that is new and kind of doesn't understand how the bioenergetic, pro-metabolic Georgi cancer studies are approaching cancer versus mainstream. Mainstream very much views cancer as like toxic, we must kill.
Alien.
There's like
it's an alien mutated cell.
Alien.
And they say because it has different DNA.
Yeah. Estrogen will help. So opposite, but they're so deep rooted in that theory, right? There's billions of dollars at stake. There's decades of quote research, facilities set up that support quote this view of cancer. Whereas in the bioenergetic pro-metabolic space, it's more cancer is a metabolic state of cells. Mm-hmm. There are some cells that are too far gone, and those can't be, turned back on. But for many cancer situations, those cancerous cells, they're just in a defective metabolic state. And there are various things that we can do to return proper metabolic function back to those cells. And that's what your B vitamins and your aspirin and your studies have shown that, hey, by giving the cells these tools that it needs to return function back to the electron transport chain and return proper energy functioning back on, we can reverse cancerous states. It's a very, positive view of cancer that no, it's not end all be all. We don't need to kill. Let's instead return energy function back to these states. And then you mentioning, the aspirin byproduct changes the pH a little bit. You were mentioning in our last interview that you think that one of the things it's doing is it's helping the cells decide which cells are too far gone and should go through apoptosis and be killed off. Yep. It's helping decide, okay, this one, we can return energy function back on. This one needs to die off, but it's not doing like radiation and killing large parts of the body. Instead, it's very much a like holistic supportive view of the cells in returning life and function back on. And it's just so opposite of what the mainstream cancer model is, which is big money. Mm-hmm. And they don't like to see that these cheap supplements can actually repair some of the things that they believe are, it's just a matter of time before you die. We just have to keep you alive for the rest. Like, let's just support you as long as we can. Is that kind of an accurate representation of the two?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, basically for 100 years, and started changing recently, little by little, the view of cancer has been, okay, over your lifetime and the longer you live, you acquire a certain amount of mutations. Basically, the DNA gets damaged.
Yeah.
And some of those mutations may turn out to be cancerous. So after the cell acquires those mutations, it's over. Other than gene editing, there's nothing else we can do for the cell. So the cell then acquires the metabolic phenotype, which is high lactate production, low carbon dioxide production, right? Oxidizing primarily fats instead of glucose. But the Mason medicine said, yes, we agree that that's the case, but that's the result of the mutation. So they're saying the structural changes come first, and they're unpredictable. There's nothing we can do about them. It's just on a random basis. If you live long enough, some of your cells will acquire these cancerous mutations. And once they acquire cancerous mutations, their genome is now different. So that's an alien cell. That's a cell that does not belong to your body. Its genome is different, literally. So the only way, and because the cell now divides and proliferates and uses a lot of energy resources, the idea is that, well, you have kind of like an alien host attached to you from the movie The Alien, and it's consuming you literally. And the only way to win this battle, let's say that they're declaring a war on cancer. I think Nixon did it in like the 1970s. The only way is to wage war on the cancer and try to do everything possible to kill every single one of these mutated alien cells. And that was the theory for over 100 years. And I believe in like 2018, there was a new study that came out, and it was posted on Reddit and generated a huge controversy, which usually means the fraud is up. that is a euphemism for somebody finally found out what we're up to. And then the study basically showed that it's the opposite way. The functional derangements, in other words, metabolic derangements, precede structural changes often by decades. So basically, every time your cell is in a metabolically stressed situation, which can happen through, starvation, eating a lot of polyunsaturated fatty fats because they're metabolic inhibitors, stressing yourself too much because that also inhibits oxidative metabolism. Every single one of these things does a little bit of a, I don't want to say, it does a little bit of a structural change.
It chips away over time.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like you have like a dam wall that's made from ice, and then you have somebody with a pickaxe. So every time your cells get stressed, somebody like hits with a pickaxe at the wall, and eventually cracks form. But the problem with the cracks is that the cells that are now metabolically deranged, if their number increases sufficiently, they have something called a quorum. So literally they vote in effect.
Quorum
if their
sensing.
neighbors are all stressed, quorum sensing, precisely. So when you're healthy, all of your cells are healthy, and if a single cell gets somehow metabolically deranged, the rest of the cells can actually say, hey, everything's fine. In fact, now there's studies showing that cells can transfer mitochondria from one cell to the other to help each other out. So basically, the healthy cells will say, hey, I have extra mitochondria, here's some more. So you, the metabolically deranged cell that has a mitochondrial dysfunction, take some of these extra mitochondria and get back, into good health. Now, what happens if you have 1,000, metabolically deranged cells, and they all like cluster around each other, right? Then they do have a quorum saying, no, things are going bad. So it really depends on at what point, and it's not currently known, at what point this quorum sensing outweighs the bad quorum sensing of these deranged cells outweighs the good quorum sensing of the cells surrounding them.
1 second. If for anyone that doesn't know, like quorum sensing can be like this bizarre concept, but essentially think of like a jury voting, or you go to like city council, and let's say there's 10 people on the board. The group can't make a decision. They're not allowed to make a decision unless X number of people show up. So let's say they require 8 people have to be there in order to make a vote. So with like cells, mitochondria, like small organisms, we see it in soil health. There's quorum sensing in soil health, where if there aren't enough microbes present, they can't collectively make a decision. And so in dead soil, a lot of functions are turned off. So for example, like natural parasite protection or natural antifungal protection of soil microbes can be shut off if there isn't sufficient live microbes there to do a quorum vote, right? And so now you're saying with cancer, with quorum sensing, if there's a sufficient amount of healthy cells, they can outcompete and make a vote to decide for that area. Whereas if there's sufficient quorum for like the cancerous cells, they can outvote and outrule that general area.
Or even more basic, if the number of metabolically deranged cells is small, the health cells around them can actually literally help them by sending out resources.
Yeah.
Now, if you're stressing yourself to the point where now you already have, let's say, 1,000 cells that are really metabolically deranged, and they have the cancer phenotype, But the rest of the body is also stressed, so it doesn't have the sufficient amount of resources to help those really metabolically deranged cells. So it's really layers of derangement,
Yeah.
and basically multiple biopsies have confirmed that if you look at, let's say, breast cancer, and there's a lump in the breast tissue. So when they excise the lump and they excise some tissue around it, and they look at the sample, the cells, the most metabolically deranged cells are right in the middle of the tumor. And going away from it, like in a circular concentric fashion, the further away you move from the tumor, the more metabolically normal these cells become. We don't know yet at what point normality or abnormality becomes critical. But it's clear that basically there's layers of abnormality, and let's say at any point in time we all have a cluster of cells that's metabolically abnormal, but they're usually kept in check by either the local cells that are around them that are healthy, sending out resources, or the immune system. If it decides that these cells are really they may cause trouble, the immune systems may kill them, may kill the deranged cells, or some of the cells, if they still maintain a sufficiently low pH, if they look at their metabolic machinery, they'll say, yeah, I don't think I can continue like that. Lights out, and I'm out.
Yeah.
So the cell is actually, it turns out that a cell has a layer of intelligence that is the same as the one as humans. Back in 2022, Ray sent a website hosted at Northwestern University. It was called Cellular Intelligence. I forget the name of the researcher who did it. By the way, that website, of course, is now gone, but you can find it through the Internet Archive. So it's still there, and I can send you some links. I suggest anybody who is interested in that, please download it while it's still there in the Internet Archives. I suspect nefarious acts, because about 2 months after Ray announced that this website is there, and I went and read it, 2 months later it's gone. Basically, the page, it was the page of the researcher who is still there, but his page where all this material was hosted is gone. So anyways, I'll send you the link. Still available through Internet Archives. A lot of interesting stuff. So what it really says is that intelligence is a basic property of the cell. So us, the intelligent organism, it's not really that we have some kind of like a emergent intelligence that comes out from a trillion dumb cells somehow working together. Is that every single one of these cells is intelligent. So every single one of these cells can make some very interesting decisions, such as, should I continue to operate abnormally, or should I, lights out and allow the rest of the cells to recover that are around me? Because if I decide that I'm consuming more resources and I'm basically more detrimental to the whole, to the body, an intelligent organism will say, well, the whole is more important than the single one, so I'll leave. And hopefully whatever resources I have, the rest of the cells can use to get better. So really that's really
it's so beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, that's what it is. It's like a population.
Yeah.
Genetic theory cannot explain why people during war can sacrifice themselves, and sometimes very willingly. Genetics says no, it's all selfishness. You should, do whatever possible to remain alive. Well, I mean, there is the greater good. Maybe value the people around you slightly more than you value yourself. So if the situation is critical, and you can think that through your actions, even though they may end you can actually ensure the survival of all the people around you that you care about. It's a rational decision at some point, depending on how extreme the circumstances are. It is a rational decision to sacrifice stuff, and that's exactly what the cells are doing. And since they're carrying the same genome, it doesn't really make much of a difference if one cell goes or another stays. It's still about the organism.
Yeah.
So something. There's a guy called Richard Dawkins who wrote the book The Selfish Gene. If you look at the book, basically it's really depressing. Like, to him, it's all about the genes are selfish. They want to copy themselves. They use us only as hosts. And basically any kind of altruistic action he explained by saying, well, you're probably genetically related to the person that you're helping, and effectively your genes are helping themselves because those genes are in the other person as well. Unfortunately for him, there are many examples of completely unjustified altruism to people who are not genetically related. In fact, everybody is to a degree related because we share the same human genome, right? And we share 95% with the chimpanzees and other animals. But it's a really cunning argument for him, because let's say if a human helps a hippo in nature, a wounded animal in nature, Richard Dawkins will say, well, we're still sharing 70% of the same genes, so it's not altruism, it's selfishness. So there's no way to disprove his allegation, because we have overlapping genes with every other living thing on this planet. So if you're planting a tree, Richard Dawkins will say, nah, that's not altruism. You're sharing 70% of the genes with the tree, so you're really propagating yourself. But people have to decide whether they accept this argument or not. I think once we reach a sufficient point of genetic distinction, if I help an amoeba or or I don't know, or a jellyfish in the ocean, I mean, we only share about 10% of the genes. At what point would Richard Dawkins accept that it's not about selfishness, basically that we care about the whole, sometimes even more so than that we care about the individual, and that concept is very well implemented in the human body. Basically, cells constantly sense their environment and constantly make decisions whether they should share more resources if they have them, or if they don't have them, they usually send distress signals. Mitochondria can break apart and can be put in the bloodstream. Because mitochondria used to be bacteria many years ago, mitochondrial fragments in the bloodstream are interpreted by the body the same way as infection. So basically, immune cells will immediately stream to the source of these mitochondrial debris. The resources will get sent from the healthy cells, and then locally there'll be an interplay of competing interests and saying, okay, immune cells want to kill that cell. The other cells say, no, maybe it's recoverable. So we don't exactly know which side takes precedence, but that's really how it works out. It's not meant to kill you.
Yeah.
The tumor is not an alien trying to kill you and consume you. The tumor really is sufficient amount of cells are metabolically deranged, and then they basically start sending distress signals. And if the rest of the body is in a metabolically suppressed state or suboptimal, eventually the distress signal can consume the entire body. So really, cancer should never be looked as a localized disease. It's a systemic disease, always a systemic disease. And if a cancer forms somewhere, that always means that the body as a whole did not have the sufficient resources to prevent the tumor from forming, which usually means lower systemic metabolic rate, which can happen, for a variety of reasons. Bad diet, chronic stress, toxins in the environment, ionizing radiation is a huge one. Many people don't even know it because doctors lie to them in saying that it's the so-called the threshold model. In other words, we can blast you with as much radiation as we want, but if each session of blasting with ionizing radiation stays below a certain amount of radiation that your body absorbs, you will never develop a tumor. But I posted a study that was done, I think in the 1960s, that said that all of this was not only false, it was fraud. General Electric got in bed with the National Academy of Sciences and convinced them to start publishing these studies saying that, no, ionizing radiation is fine, as long as you get below a certain dose each time. And the goal of GE at the time was to sell radiation equipment because they were the largest manufacturer of radiation equipment in the world. I think they still are. It's GE and Siemens, which is a German company, that are producing all the CT scans, the X-ray machines, the PET scans. It's all about radiation to them. So it was a huge business, and the National Academy of Science, which is probably the highest public science policy setting body in the United States, willingly got in bed with GE and said, yeah, sure, pay us and then we'll publish whatever you want. So ionized radiation is terrible, and now new studies are coming out showing that non-ionizing radiation is still bad. And the way the argument has been presented over the last 20 years, that okay, we admit that ionized radiation is bad, right? But we're still going to say that unless you get a sufficient dose, it's okay, right? You can get 100 X-rays a life, nothing will happen to you if the radiation amount you absorb each time is below a certain threshold. And then for non-ionizing radiation, for even to this day, basically try to say something about EMF, which is electromagnetic frequency, that EMF radiation is bad on Twitter, on Reddit, you immediately get downvoted to oblivion. Immediately people say, this is insane. There's no known way through which EMF can change the structure of the cell, right? Which is correct, right? But what if the theory of cancer, the metabolic theory of cancer is true? Then if EMF could create metabolic disturbances, it can certainly over time create structural ones as well. And there was another Q&A on Reddit, I think it was 2017. So this guy who I think works as a professor at the University of Waterloo in Canada, and he's proclaimed by many people to be the world's most renowned expert on EMF and its effects on the human body. So he said he did a Q&A, and Reddit people saying, a lot of your research says that EMF is bad. how can you be so responsible? Basically scares people needlessly. It hurts the industry. It hurts the development. He said, look, our results are clear. When you're exposed to EMF for sufficient amount of time each day, and it doesn't have to be a big wattage, in other words, a big amount of energy to absorb. It just has to be, relatively continuous over a long period of time. He said our research clearly shows that that if you're exposed to EMF for sufficiently long period of time, it inhibits oxidative phosphorylation. But that's exactly the mechanism behind cancer. And not only cancer, it's the same mechanism behind diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, and medicine is starting to recognize the metabolic connection with many of the diseases, except cancer. I think they'll fight this to the bitter end. But now they're saying there are several drugs in clinical trials for Alzheimer's disease, and their goal is to increase the metabolic rate. Same for Parkinson's disease, same for diabetes. And you know what drug they're using? The drug that FDA told people will kill you if you take it, and it can if you take too much. It's called dinitrophenol. And what does dinitrophenol do? Dramatically boosts your metabolic rate. So it acts similarly to thyroid. The problem with it is that if you take too much, you can overheat and die. Same thing can happen with thyroid, right? So it's really the dose that makes, not even the poison, it's not a poison, it's just a pro-metabolic substance. So now behind the scenes, FDA is giving licenses to at least 20 different companies that are testing dinitrophenol for every condition every chronic condition you can imagine. They haven't touched the cancer angle yet, but I think the next big study that we'll never hear about will be with dinitrophenol for cancer. In fact, I plan on doing one, and then see what happens. You don't even have to take that much. I mean, the human doses that are being given in these limited clinical trials are 100 to 200 milligrams a day. You'll be with those dosages for most people, you'll be mildly uncoupled to the same degree that you would be if you were taking aspirin or thyroid. So if you don't want to take DNP, or if it becomes a controlled drug, by the way, it's already a banned drug. FDA will come and bust your door if you try to sell DNP or tell people to take DNP and whatnot. So if you don't want, the hazards associated with DNP, whether legal or personally physiological, you can achieve the exact same things with aspirin or thyroid, or eating a little bit of extra calcium, or avoiding polyunsaturated fats. All of these remedies have the final effect of increasing your metabolic rate, which now medicine recognizes, with the exception of cancer, is behind potentially every chronic disease that we know.
Yeah, I think people forget that metabolic rate, producing energy, this pathway of taking the food that we eat, which is filled with energized electrons, bringing it through the electron transport chain to the end oxygen, electron acceptor oxygen, getting cellular energy from that process, ATP. There's many different layers to that, and one of which is electrical, right? We are electrical beings. And so like you were saying, EMF, there was recently the study that was released about the San Francisco Giants football stadium.
Yeah.
And there was an electrical tower or something right next to the stadium, and players were getting hurt. Their joints were getting messed up. So more and more information's coming out about that. And it's wait, we're treating cancer with that. And it's such a different view of cancer, where understanding there's many layers to improving metabolic rate, the food that you're eating, the types of food that you're eating. Of course, those are the inputs in to the electron transport chain, but there's also the cofactors, which is the micronutrients. But then there's the environment inside of you, and that environment will change based on your stress level, your EMF exposure around you. And so the mainstream model doesn't recognize this. It just treats it as we just need to kill. Whereas this more holistic pro-metabolic approach is, let's give the cells the tools that it needs, the environment that it needs, so that it can turn things back on. With your studies that you've done so far, you've done the B vitamins, the aspirin, and the byproduct of aspirin.
And one more.
Those have been very much giving the cells the tools that it needs and the right pH and cellular environment to be able to make these intelligent decisions of, hey, this cell is good enough to turn back on. Let's return energy function here. This one's too far gone. Let's get rid of it because it's draining the limited energy that the organism needs at whole.
Yeah.
What would you say the main mechanism is for, testosterone and these other layers of adding the beneficial youth promoting hormones? Would you say that that's more changing the cellular environment
It's
because
both.
that's such an important distinction for breast cancer that we're, prostate cancer. It's such an opposite mindset. So what would you say the adding, because you said you've done recent studies on the testosterone and
Yeah,
DHT and things, what
yeah.
would you say that main mechanism is?
Oh, it's been known for a very long time that androgens in both males and females, they promote mitochondrial biogenesis. So, and the way they do that is usually by opposing the effects of estrogen and cortisol. And these two are stress hormones.
Yeah.
I think everybody will recognize, even mainstream doctors, that cortisol is a stress hormone. They'll say, well, it's physiological, it's necessary, etc. And that's true, but within limits. And also, it's not only, I mean, again, to move away from the threshold model, they'll say, oh, as long as your cortisol is not at these levels, you're fine. Well, if my baseline cortisol is consistently in the upper 15th percentile of the normal range, which by the way they keep extending, moving the upper limit higher, so that if you were 10 years ago, if you had the morning cortisol of 18, and I think currently the upper limit is 21, you will be considered hypercortisolemic. The doctor will probably refer you to an endocrinologist to see what's happening. Not based on a single test, but they'll do a couple of tests, let's say, once every month. And if 2 out of 3, all 3 came back were even mildly over the upper limit, doctors take this very seriously. They know that chronic elevated cortisol is bad, right? But then, even if with the old range, which was, I think the upper limit was 15, if your cortisol is consistently at 13, and then upper limit is 15, over time, because of the metabolic derangement that the cortisol does, such as inhibiting mitochondrial biogenesis, you will get into a very hypometabolic state, low metabolic state. And because of the lack of energy, the cells will not be able to repair themselves, and eventually this whole cancerization process starts. And it doesn't. In cancer, if you do cancer at one extreme, there's a spectrum of diseases, starting from health on one side. Then let's say fatigued will be the first step going towards bad things happening. Then things like, I don't know, breaking a bone or a shoulder will be another one. And then developing chronic disease on one or more of the organs, like a liver disease or heart disease or kidney disease, will be even more extreme. Then the next step will be fibrosis, whether in organs or skin or whatnot, right? And then the final stage is cancer. So all solid tumors are known to be indistinguishable from scar tissue. In other words, there's a lot of collagen deposition, very low metabolic rate, a lot of cells that are dead but are still there, right? So when you remove a lump, let's say from a breast cancer patient, at the very core of the tumor, that tissue is indistinguishable from the tissue that you could extract from a big scar that you have that formed, I don't know, 10 years ago. You like surgery, and then there's scar tissue, right? And that scar tissue is still, I mean, there's some dead cells there, but the ones that remain alive, that are really not very functional, which is why you have this collagenous, hard to the touch area, and that's what we call the scar. And the reason the scar forms is that these cells are metabolically, deranged. They have very low metabolism, and it's not uncommon to have tumors form around the scar tissue or actually inside of the scar tissue, because that remains a metabolically deranged tissue. Babies don't form scars. Young children rarely form scars. And one of the distinctions between us and them is that they have a much higher metabolic rate, much higher production of carbon dioxide. Ray mentioned a few studies where people could regrow the tip of their finger if it's lopped off. All they have to do is like wrap the finger in a plastic bag, so basically starts accumulating carbon dioxide, because some carbon dioxide actually does seep out, from the skin, and then keep it there until the wound heals. And I think over several weeks or even months, you can actually regrow the missing fingertip. That's something that medicine claims is impossible. I mean, I know people who have lost fingertips and they stay there. I mean, they're missing a fingertip, and they've been told unless we do some kind of a graft from another part of the body and attach it there and try to like mold it to look like a fingertip, you'll miss it for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
But really, what the Ray examples show, and the fact that the children don't form scars, is that high metabolism is absolutely necessary for self-repair. Everything takes energy in the body, right? The cell has all the mechanisms it needs to repair itself or decide to lights out if it's too damaged. You don't need external intervention. All the external intervention does is kill cells. Okay, maybe some of them are beyond salvation and should be killed, but let the body figure it out. Because when you're doing it with the outside influence, such as cut, poison, burn, in other words, surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy, you're indiscriminately killing many other healthy cells. And because of the stress response that these interventions create, you now shifted the quorum sensing even more towards derangement, even more towards cancer. And that's why usually cancer returns after, tumors being completely removed or destroyed with radiation and whatnot. There's something called the radiation bystander effect. When you blast a certain part of your body with ionizing radiation, the cells, they get immediately metabolically deranged and start producing lactic acid, release inflammatory mediators, carbon dioxide production drops. Of course, the mitochondria is destroyed because of the ionizing radiation. So you can show that ionizing radiation immediately causes the cancer phenotype. So how can you expect something that causes cancer to cure cancer? It's idiotic.
But they get money off of it.
Yeah, they get money and they're saying, well, we have to kill it. So they say, yes, we actually, they do admit, they say, well, there's something called secondary cancers due to treatment. Yeah. So, and they actually, they give you these brochures. If you go for any kind of a radiation treatment, they will tell you, well, here's your risk that we think that you're going to get another cancer as a result of the radiation treatment, even if we manage to kill the first cancer and cure you. And the odds are not small. And by the way, the odds that they do publish are also ridiculously lowered because they're still based on the whole threshold theory, right? Yeah. They're actually very high. I mean, if you undergo radiation treatment for, let's say, 6 months for a sufficiently advanced cancer, chances are eventually you will die from another cancer, and most likely it would have been caused by this radiation treatment.
So you brought up something I think that's really important for people to understand. We've been talking about turning proper energy function back on for cells. So, the Warburg effect, glycolytic metabolism, where cells are deranged, they're not doing oxidative phosphorylation. Right. And so they produce energy, but at lower levels, and they produce a toxic metabolic product called lactic acid. Mm-hmm. So they produce more lactic acid, whereas cells that are doing proper energy production, they go through the electron transport chain, through oxidative phosphorylation, and they get a lot more cellular ATP. So they're adding to the energy reserve of the whole body, but they don't produce lactic acid, and they instead produce carbon dioxide. And producing more carbon dioxide versus more lactic acid creates a completely different internal environment inside the body, and having more carbon dioxide promotes this self-healing environment, whereas producing more lactic acid, that's going to lend towards quorum sensing of the bad cells taking over. And so that's kind of one of the ways that returning proper energy function back on in these cells and promoting more carbon dioxide promotes self-healing and regenerative capabilities and restoring proper function. It's like the domino effect. Like once you get sufficient amounts, then more follow and we get better improved environment. So what are you...
Positive feedback cycle on both ends. So bad begets more bad and good begets more good. And biochemically, it makes very good sense. I mean, if you think of it, of the redox state as determining the overall health of the cell. In other words, oxidation is good, reduction is bad. I mean, relatively speaking. When you produce a lactic acid is a reductant. The body does not like it. I mean, the cell does not like it. A lot of it gets exported outside of the cell, which is why people with chronic disease or injuries and whatnot, there's something called lactic acidemia. So the acidic lactate gets exported. It's not acidic by itself, but lactate together with 2 hydrogen ions gets exported outside of the cell. The buildup of hydrogen ions creates acidity in the bloodstream. So medicine called this lactic acidemia. And it's very common in cancer, but also many other chronic diseases and even acute diseases as well. If you have a leg injury, like a gashing wound and whatnot, and sample the tissue around it, or even like take a blood sample from a leg vein or something that's still in the same leg, you will find higher than normal amounts of lactic acid. And the purpose of lactic acid is to increase cellular division and growth. So in other words, it's a signal to other cells around it that there's an injury here. We need to start multiplying in order to basically repair whatever the injury is. Unfortunately, lactic acid, because it's a reductant, whatever remains in the cell, because the body does not like it, it has to get oxidized back to pyruvate. But when a reductant is processed, it reduces something else, which is an oxidizing agent. And one of the oxidizing agents that lactate, consumes is something called ubiquinone, which is coenzyme Q10. And in a recent podcast with Dr. Mercola, we discussed some studies showing that the mitochondria starts to dismantle itself as soon as the ubiquinol, which is the oxidized version, to ubiquinol, which is the reduced version, as soon as that ratio drops below a critical point, the cell says, because it needs the redox balance to be shifted towards oxidation in order to work, the cell says, oh, I'm getting shifted, I'm producing too much lactic acid. Lactic acid is directly creating a redox balance in the mitochondria that is shifted towards reduction, right? And then the cell says, it means I cannot afford to maintain mitochondria. I'm going to start to dismantle it. So, but if you dismantle mitochondria, means you cannot, then you further increase the production of lactic acid, because lactic acid forms when glucose cannot be processed to the mitochondria. So, but if lactic acid inhibits mitochondria, it means more glucose will go to lactate. Lactate will inhibit mitochondria even further, right? And eventually you get into a situation where the ultimate is only glycolysis remaining, which is the pure Warburg effect, and there's no mitochondria left. I think at that point, probably the cell decides that, I would like to commit apoptosis. Yeah. But here's why it does not happen in cancer cells.
Sacrificing for the whole.
Yeah. Because the lactate itself, when you export the lactate and the acidity to the extracellular environment, the cell becomes alkaline. And then in an alkaline state, the apoptosis mechanism does not work. If you shift the pH, so means pH means alkaline pH means high pH. Alkaline state means high pH. If you shift the pH further down towards acidity, and the way it happens is because the cell normally does this with carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is itself an acid, a Lewis acid. So normal metabolism means a lot of carbon dioxide production, which means a relatively acidic state of the cell. In addition, carbon dioxide is a promoter of mitochondrial biogenesis. So the more carbon dioxide you produce, the more mitochondria you'll make. The more mitochondria will make, the more glucose you'll be able to process and produce even more carbon dioxide. So again, this is the good side. Good begets more good, and in the lactate and the destruction of mitochondria, bad begets more bad. And one way to acidify the cell, if it's in a bad state, which means alkaline, is that you can breathe in carbon dioxide, and that's behind the carbon dioxide therapy that Ray talked about. There are institutes.
You can do that with a paper bag.
Yes,
brown paper bag.
Brown paper bag. Any container basically that you can inhale and exhale out of, right? So you can build up the carbon dioxide, and you can actually tell a lot about your relative health by how quickly breathing into that closed container becomes, I don't want to say uncomfortable, but it triggers like a reaction like you're choking. And the quicker this happens, this means the more carbon dioxide you're exhaling, so the container fills up with carbon dioxide quicker. If you're in a very bad state, like in terms of like metabolics, you probably spend several minutes breathing in and out of that thing before enough carbon dioxide builds up there, so you actually start feeling that when the body feels that you're breathing in too much carbon dioxide, it triggers like a not hypoxia, but like a almost like a strangulation reaction. So you start to panic a little bit. So the quicker that panic reaction sets in when you breathe into a closed container, the healthier you are. The longer this drags on, means the less carbon dioxide you're producing. So it takes a long time for the carbon dioxide to accumulate to the necessary levels in the container.
So this is why your pH alkaline water isn't doing anything for your body, because your metabolic state impacts the pH levels, the acidity inside your body. Yeah. If you are doing more oxidative metabolism, which means you're properly oxidizing carbohydrates, going through the mitochondria, through the electron transport chain, you're generating CO2, which changes the pH. If you're relying more on glycolysis outside the mitochondria, more this Warburg glycolytic metabolism, cancer metabolism, you're going to have more lactic acid production, less CO2. So those different energetic outcomes will create different environments inside of you. Your pH water is not really going to change that. You got to change the energetic state of your body. Right. I know you have to go.
And actually, doctors will tell you when you drink alkaline water, it's doing nothing for your cells. I've seen a lot of counter commercials to say, and they're correct. Now, the alkaline water may change the extracellular space, which is the blood, but what you care about is inside of the cell. And the cell maintains that pH with an iron fist. So that's why it's so hard sometimes to shift it more towards oxidation, because of the structural changes that have occurred as a result of the reduction. So it's not like the cell simply lost its mind and you can flip a switch and say, go back to normality. The cell will be like, okay, with what? So
I know you got to go.
Resources. Yeah.
I know you got to go. Can you give a brief update, however long you can, of what cancer studies you're working on right now, what you're investigating and comparing for new variables and updates?
I did a podcast earlier this year with a gentleman called David Gornosky, and another guest of that podcast was Dr. Seyfried, who's been basically probably the loudest voice outside of Ray, but he's actually squarely into the industry. He's a doctor himself, and believes in mainstream medicine. But he's the one who published a book and has been publishing a number of articles saying cancer is a metabolic disease. The disagreement that we had is that he said sugar causes cancer. We need to get rid of sugar. Let's do keto diet, etc.
That's kind of a big disagreement, though, Georgi. That's kind of a base fundamental difference there.
And I'm trying to now confirm who is right. That's the next study. The next study is with brain tumor, glioblastoma, again, human one. I don't know many people that survived it. Actually, there's one person on the forum whose son got it, still alive 7 years later, and they're taking the child is taking cyproheptadine and aspirin, and the tumor is stable, not grown, no treatment, no other treatment, no surgery, no radiation, no chemotherapy. They decline all of that, and only cyproheptadine and aspirin. So the next study is with that tumor, which usually kills everybody regardless of treatment. Senator John McCain died from that tumor. Senator Ted Kennedy died from that tumor. So I'm doing a study where there are several groups that are being tested different compounds. One group is getting only the drug Meldonium or Mildronate, and Ray wrote about the drug. The only known function of that drug is to inhibit fat oxidation and promote glucose oxidation. So then there's another group which is basically with aspirin only. And then sufficiently high dose in the range that Ray said this should actually it should be therapeutic for cancer, already established cancer. And then another unknown effect of aspirin. A lot of people think of it as an anti-inflammatory drug, but salicylic acid in large doses depletes the amino acid L-carnitine. And then L-carnitine is necessary for oxidation of long-chain fatty acids. Meldonium does the exact same thing. So really, aspirin is the open source, cheap, dirt cheap, and widely available version of Meldonium. You just have to have you have to take sufficiently high doses of it. And it also has an anti-inflammatory effect, which is always a bonus. So that's the second group. The third group is a combination of Meldonium and aspirin. And then there's another group with 2,6-DHBA by itself. And then 2,6-DHBA in combination with either Meldonium or 2,6-DHBA in combination with aspirin. So I think 6 or 7 different groups. But if any of the groups where Meldonium is just preferably the one that takes only Meldonium comes back with a positive effect, even without a cure, I think that invalidates Dr. Seyfried's theory that, glucose is the devil.
To explain on that real quick, for people who are not doing oxidative phosphorylation, they're relying on glycolysis and higher levels of fat oxidation as opposed to oxidative phosphorylation with proper carbohydrate burning. So you're basically saying that by shutting down fat oxidation, we can return cellular energy function to these deranged cells.
So actually, the excessive glycolysis is the result of excessive fatty acid oxidation.
Exactly.
Because due to the Randall cycle, as we know, the cell can only oxidize glucose or fat at any point in time, and they compete for the machinery. So when you oxidize primarily fat, which happens under stress, and some people promote it. I mean, I don't want to pick on Dr. Seyfried. I'm actually very grateful for him exposing the fact that cancer is a metabolic disease. But there are plenty of influencers out there saying, no, keto is the way to go, low carb, starving, fasting. All of these things have the effect of reducing, basically shifting the body towards oxidizing more fat. Well, if you're oxidizing primarily fat, glucose, whether you supply or not, whatever is there, whether you supply more or not, it's not going to get metabolized. It's going to get wasted into lactate. Because the entry point of glucose into the Krebs cycle, pyruvate dehydrogenase is the name of that enzyme. It depends entirely on the ratio of NAD plus to NADH, or also something else called acetyl coenzyme A, a ratio of acetyl coenzyme A to coenzyme A alone. And oxidizing fat drops both of these ratios. So when either one of those or both are low, pyruvate dehydrogenase cannot work. So you end up building pyruvate, and pyruvate acts as an emergency oxidant to reoxidize NADH back into NADH, so you get a lot of lactate. So by definition, excessive fatty acid oxidation means elevated intracellular lactate, period. This has been proven many times. So cancer is known to be in that state. Diabetes is another condition known to be in that state. By the way, it's not a coincidence that a lot of people with diabetes go on to develop cancer. Think of it as a spectrum of diseases, right? Diabetes is probably like only 1 or 2 steps before cancer. So the goal is to show that if we remove the excessive fatty acid oxidation, which should restore proper glucose oxidation, if that results in stopping the tumor growth, then I think the discussion, first of all, the discussion is almost already over whether cancer is a metabolic disease or not. But it also another thing that will end, this result will end the fact that glucose oxidation is paramount. Oxidizing fat is not a good sign. You don't want to promote it, right? In any way. It's a sign of stress. That's, in any organism in the wild, basically, like, if you're oxidizing fat means you're consuming stored energy. And the body consumes stored energy when you're not intaking enough energy from the environment, in other words, through food, and sufficient amount of glucose.
This will end the claim cancer feeds on sugar. No. Cancer
feeds on
is
fat.
Reacting to your metabolic state.
Yeah. And the reason cancer, there is very well-known documented fact that cancer cells uptake a lot more glucose than normal cells. And medicine has been using this as an argument saying, see, we told you, these cancer cells are addicted to sugar. We need to stop their supply of sugar, and this will get rid of cancer. They tried. It didn't work. In fact, they created a special molecule called 2-deoxyglucose, which basically competes with regular glucose for entry into the cell. In another way, it starves the cell of glucose because the cell cannot absorb the glucose from the bloodstream. It did not work. There was an initial, kind of like the castration in prostate cancer. There's an initial, flattening of the curve. I think it's simply the body tries to adapt to the new environment. It's a natural environment. And then the cancer comes back even more aggressive. So basically it shows that glucose oxidation, good. It's a sign that the environment and the organism is in a good state. Sufficient food resources. Nobody's stressing you out. There's no bear chasing you, right? You're not afraid of losing your job. And that's usually when we're in a good state. I don't even know why this needs to be said. Like everybody intuitively perceives stress is bad, right? There's even books now written and an article published saying chronic stress is bad. Well, it's bad in a much worse way than they make it, than they actually present it. It's not only going to give you, bad mood or even depression. Over time, it will literally kill you by causing every single chronic disease that we know. And and it does that by stimulating the excessive oxidation of fats. If we interrupt that process, the cells that are still relatively structurally undamaged, they will revert back to oxidizing glucose. Glucose will create sufficient amount of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide will create more mitochondria, and the cells will be back to normal. If the cells are either entirely glycolytic, basically they've destroyed all the mitochondria. I don't know what the threshold is, but we know that there's a threshold beyond which they cannot recover. Simply introducing more carbon dioxide into the body by allowing the oxidation of glucose will allow these cells to commit apoptosis because the carbon dioxide will drop their pH.
It'll be really interesting to see the results of these studies and then further down the line investigate PUFAs versus saturated fats because saturated fats actually promote proper oxidation of carbohydrates, whereas PUFAs literally directly inhibit that. So it'll be neat to, I'll encourage you to do follow-up studies on different fatty acid intake levels because I'm sure your financial resources are, you've got endless levels of money to throw at these cancer studies. I have 2 questions. That's really exciting. When do you expect to have those results done?
Well, first, to your study about the fat, I already did something similar. If you remember, Ray had an article about a gentleman who went on a fat-free diet for several months. And going on a fat-free diet, you effectively, that has the effect of eating 100% saturated fatty acid diet, because when you don't intake any fat from the outside, the only fats we can endogenously synthesize are saturated, and we use glucose to do that, right? So that is indirectly similar in effects to eating a diet that has all the micronutrients, but the fat portion of it is 100% saturated. So when I did that study, the lab could not get the tumor to form in the mice. They were 100% resistant to the tumor. I can say
rejects the tumor.
Yeah, so they injected it 17 times. Even though the mice are immunocompromised, these tumors are very aggressive. In other circumstances, on a normal diet, chow diet, as they say, tumor develops within 2 or 3 days, starts growing, and then we start administering the experimental compounds. With that model, they could not get the tumor to form in the mice.
Because there's some level of PUFAs in that standard chow diet, right?
Oh, this is a significant amount of PUFA. I think it's 20 or 25% of the fat, actually even more, because they try to make it about 25% PUFA, I think another 50% maybe monounsaturated fat, and only 15% or even less of saturated, because the theory is that it's bad for animals and for us. So they really, the standard chow diet is really bad for the animals and mimics a very stressful diet for us humans, which tells me, or this suggests, that the mice that I could not cure of cancer were because they were on a pretty crappy diet. So it's still, in spite of the crappy diet, there's about 66%, 60 to 70% full cure rate with either the aspirin or the B vitamins or the 2,6-DHBA or DHT, the hydrotestosterone, or an aromatase inhibitor. And now we'll see what happens when we inhibit the excessive oxidation of fat.
Imagine if we could do a rat chow or a mouse chow diet that had coconut oil or tallow or dairy fats. That would be pretty cool to see. But again, limited financial.
They have it. They call it a fully saturated fat diet. It uses fully hydrogenated coconut oil, but they use it only to test. They say, okay, let's see what happens when you eat only saturated fat diet. Oh, your cholesterol rises, right? So they're saying, well, that's a sign of. They assume it means heart disease because they don't run the studies for too long to see if the heart is actually formed. They say, oh yeah, cholesterol showed up. That's if it's so high, that means definitely heart disease.
That
so
dogma needs to die.
Yeah, it does exist, but it's not the standard diet. You have to order it specifically. The standard diet, just considered baseline and not shifting the body in any direction, is the equivalent of the high PUFA diet that most people eating processed foods in the Western world today will be eating on a daily basis.
So when do you think you'll have these results done? And is there a way for people to help support you through these studies?
So the Meldonium study is basically the mice have already been immunocompromised. So now they're currently injecting them with the tumor cells and waiting for the tumor to take a hold. And then they start administering the compound. So by the middle of February, that study should have already started in terms of administering the compounds.
Cool.
And it usually takes 4 to 8 weeks, depending on how big the tumor growth, how rapid the tumor growth is. If it's not rapid, it can extend longer because I'm keeping it as long as possible to see if the curve flattens, then it can go either way in the future, right? It can either go down, it can go up, start growing again, or it can stay flat. I mean, at some point you have to terminate the study because there are ethical considerations. I don't think they allow you to run it for more than 3 months.
Yeah.
So I'm saying anywhere from a month and a half from now to like 4.5 months from now, in the event that the curve stays flat for a very long time, is when these results should be available. And in terms of financing, I mean, the studies are expensive and it's all coming out of my pocket. But for now, I would prefer not to take donations. Yeah. But if whatever comes out of these studies is promising, I've already been approached by people to do so-called crowd-funded human studies.
Yeah.
And for those, basically, we'll have to compensate the volunteers with something. I mean, basically,
we need crowdfunding for two things. We need crowdfunding for the human studies, which is incredibly expensive. We also need crowdfunding for a security guard around Georgi. We must protect Georgi because they are going to come after you. I'm 100% serious. So as you get these studies over these next few months, I'd love to get you back on the podcast and legitimately discuss how people can support you through this. Like, I would like to donate into these funds because it's incredibly important. And so any assistance that you need getting those set up, please let's get that going. But for everyone listening, in the meantime, you can support Georgi through Idea Labs. Can you remind everyone of the website link?
It's Idea Labs DC because of the companies in DC. So Idea Labs, plural, DC. D as in dog, C as in Charlie, one word. IdeaLabsDC.com.
Okay.
So yeah, that's it. And stay positive. I think we're gonna see some big changes over the next couple of years. By the way, the studies that I'm doing, if it was only me doing something like that, I'll be very, very worried. But I know you read my blog every once in a while.
Yeah.
There was a study with cyproheptadine curing a person's terminal liver cancer, right? These people were they weren't suicided. The study's still there. There's another study of a woman curing her terminal pancreatic cancer. It's really deadly, no treatment for it, by taking 50,000 units of vitamin D3 daily. I know it's a massive dose, but it worked for her. Then there's a number of different the studies with prostate cancer, right? They administered testosterone injections directly to the prostates and the tumor disappeared. That very much strikes into the theory, even though they claim it's aromatizable, but that's also a result that undermines the androgenic theory and indirectly hits at the funding for it, right? So those doctors are still there. They're still publishing more studies.
And the beautiful thing is those are 3 different cases and 3 different things that they did. But with the pro-metabolic lens, you can see why all three of those things work.
All
For
of
the
them.
cyproheptadine, it reduced endotoxin, which is a metabolic hindrance. Vitamin D3, changing the internal environment, improving metabolic function. And testosterone, like you said, improving the metabolic function of the cells. They're all working on potentially, everyone has a slightly different issue with them, right? Like we all have different pasts and histories, and you have to find what your quote missing link is for returning function back to your cells. So they're all collectively under the same lens. They all still work. Whereas mainstream medicine, it would see all three of those as very different, like, oh, treating different things, but no, it's actually the same holistic bioenergetic state. It's just removing metabolic breaks.
Yep. And I have a more direct example. Cyproheptadine is primarily a serotonin antagonist. Serotonin is the master down regulator in the metabolism in the body together with cortisol. So obviously, if you're opposing serotonin, you'll be improving metabolism.
Yeah.
Vitamin D3, a lot of people have kind of like a confusion of what exactly it does, why does it help? Medicine will tell you it's a calcium regulator, right? It helps the absorption of calcium. What medicine will not tell you is that the vitamin D receptors through which vitamin D exerts its actions are in the same family of the thyroid receptors. Vitamin D is thyroid. So, and thyroid is the master regulator of the upregulator of metabolism, working exactly the opposite to cortisol and to serotonin. And then finally, testosterone, dihydrotestosterone, and anti-estrogens. So in other words, whenever you promote androgenic tone, you increase mitochondrial biogenesis, which improves metabolism. Vitamin D3 does the same because vitamin D is thyroid, right? Increase mitochondrial biogenesis. And then lowering serotonin allows metabolism to pick up, again, increasing mitochondrial biogenesis, and ultimately more carbon dioxide, more healthy cells, less lactate. Happy story.
Yeah. Okay, great. Keep me posted on the results of those studies. Would love to have you back on, and we can all be like the healthy cells in the body, donating mitochondria and energy towards this cumulative effort to improve science at large and actually truly cure people and promote the idea that, you know, the body can self-heal. We don't have to destroy and kill everything.
I agree. And just spread the word. Cancer is a metabolic disease. Now, at least Dr. Seyfried and a bunch of other doctors are saying it openly, which means it can be cured in vast majority of cases. And another thing it means is the current therapy, which kills people, should be stopped.
Yeah. It's such a better, more hopeful mindset too. So
anything can be fixed with the sufficient amount of resources, which in the case of the body is energy. I think it's always energy in any case, but specifically in the body is metabolic energy.
It's funny, Georgie. Did you ever go to Georgetown thinking I'm going to be a cancer researcher?
Nope. No, but I remember the speech given by Steve Jobs, a commencement speech in Stanford 2005. And he quoted actually a philosopher who said, life can only be understood when looking backwards, but unfortunately it can only be lived forwards. So don't try to like really plan for the future and whatnot. We probably have a bit of a path already set, not entirely. We can make choices, right? But if you look back into what happened, it makes perfect sense, and things line up in a way for you to end up where you are right now. I mean, I basically went into that biochemical outfit after graduating with a computer science degree, worked there without ever thinking that anything will come out of it. In fact, it was just a temporary job until the computer science industry would pick up back again, and then I'll get into the computer science industry, which I did eventually. But even that industry started tanking, so I had to go back to my hobby, which I liked the most, and that's how I ended up here.
I'm a PhD in mechanical engineering for no reason, turned regenerative farmer.
There you go.
Life has a way of working out for the best.
Well, there's a lot of mechanical engineering in regenerative farming. I mean, even putting equipment aside, I'm sure you're dealing with it every day. Working with soil, anything in matter is mechanical engineering. I mean, just how the different parts fit together, what's optimal, what isn't optimal. In fact, I think it's only one really discipline, is that keeping an open mind so that you can work with the things that are currently in front of you to do something better today than was yesterday. That's the only degree.
Yep. Love it. Okay. Thanks, Georgie. I know you got to go. Appreciate it. Keep me posted, and God bless you. Seriously.
Okay. Thank you.